Thanks so much for being with us here on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Joy Lim Nakrin. I want to let you know I have a very special guest joining me today. This is retired Agent Trebor Randle, formerly with the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, where Agent Randle, you actually led the unit that would investigate child crimes, child fatalities, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so, the reason we're so blessed to have Agent Randle here today, there's several unsolved crime stories that we've been following, and I want to start off with the case of this missing 14-year-old girl. This is a story that we've been following closely here on Atlanta News First Plus, and her name is Aviana Mitchell. She was reported missing more than a week ago by her parents. She was caught on camera actually running away from her grandmother's home last week, but her parents say that's really out of character for her. They're very concerned that it may have something to do with a person she's communicating with on a cell phone or a social media app. Her father has told Atlanta News First he wants DeKalb police to do more to find his daughter. Again, this is in DeKalb County. So, we've been looking into this story, and where she was caught on camera running from the home was in DeKalb on Rollingwood Lane. But, Agent Randle, I mean, there is some concern that, by the parents that investigators are not doing enough to actually to find their daughter. What can you share in terms of insight on how these sorts of cases are handled? What would be the process?
It's not uncommon, Joy, that you find frustration on the side of the families when their loved one goes missing, especially when we're talking about a child. But there are so many processes that we have to understand, on both sides of it. Oftentimes, I found myself in the middle of cases where, a child was deceased, whether it was accidental or intentional, and then the families, and then the law enforcement side of it. So I think part of the frustration with the family in this case seems to be how the initial investigation was started, or how the initial report was made and how it was handled. So it's important that families understand that, first of all, as soon as your child is missing, or, if it's out of their character not to be home, by 9 o'clock, on a school night or something like that, number one, you need to report it as soon as possible. That's most important. But oftentimes, depending on the age, that's going to play a role. No two cases are the same. Other circumstances. What's the history with this family and this child? Are there behavioral issues with the child? They're going to be looking at DFACS. They're going to contact DFACS. Is there any history there? Or was this completely out of the ordinary? Is it something that had occurred before? So there are so many factors, but it doesn't take away from the fact that there's always should be urgency when a child is reported missing.
Absolutely. And, what you're touching on, it really underscores what the family has said. And the family is saying that police haven't been back to knock on doors to get surveillance video. And saying, basically that they believe, and the neighbors saying, I believe they should have been here immediately. Of course, it's not clear if that's actually the case. But the other thing that's very interesting, like you were talking about, kind of the history, the relationship with the family and what's been going on in the teenager's life. Iviana's father has said it's unlike his daughter to run away because she hasn't had a phone in about a year. And the reason for that is he caught her communicating with strangers on gaming apps inappropriately and lying about her age. So this is where some of the concern comes in. What does that tell you in your years of leading investigations, into child crimes? When you hear this kind of detail, what does that tell you?
Every parent's worst nightmare. You talk to your kids, you teach them, about what they shouldn't be doing online, what they should be doing. All of these popular apps, we're constantly trying to educate parents. It's a constant challenge because our kids want that technology, and, we don't want to be the bad parents not to allow them to have these digital devices, not to be on certain apps. Certainly age appropriateness is always a factor. You have the Snapchats, the TikToks, smacks, the kicks, and all of these things that have been out there before, parents are just not aware of how dangerous some of them can be. So you have to teach them how to be responsible. You also have to be nosy as a parent. I tell them, don't worry about that intrusiveness that kids complain about. You have to check their devices. You have to use family monitoring plans that Verizon and some of the other companies provide, so you can see how late they're on the phone, what sites they're visiting. As law enforcement, I certainly encourage that, because times that didn't happen, kids were lured out of their homes. The parents had no clue that they had met someone online, and unfortunately that child, turns up deceased. So I think that all of those things should go into consideration, and may have with this case. Again, the age, a 7, 8-year-old child, we're going to do things a little bit differently, some agencies, compared to a 14 or 15-year-old that may have some history. But again, it's important to note, if you have reason to believe the child is in danger, that's going to trigger certain things. People want to know, why can't they have a Levi's call activation just because their child hasn't come home? There are certain criteria in place for that. So we have to help educate the families and the public as well. You can do a media advisory if you don't have any information, versus information to believe that a child has been abducted.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to ask you also about another missing persons case, and this is an adult, actually. Sorry, so sorry. Well, this is. Let me get to this piece of video this is a 22-year-old woman who's missing, and just wanted to let our viewers know, because as always, if they have any information about where this individual might be, along with the 14-year-old girl, they're encouraged to contact authorities. So this is a 22-year-old woman who's gone missing, Hannah Grogan, last seen April 1st, 4 p.m. She discharged herself from a facility there. She'd been diagnosed with multiple mental illnesses, and she has a tattoo on her neck that reads "Death Before Dishonor." But I want to ask you, when you're dealing with cases like this, where the individual has multiple mental illnesses, how do you go about that as a law enforcement officer and an investigator?
Again, it can be very difficult, because you're dealing with a family who is probably in panic mode by now. Again, as law enforcement, we have to look at the factors. We're talking about a 22-year-old adult. They do sometimes leave home or live on their own, and don't necessarily keep in contact with their families. And we're in the middle trying to differentiate what's the difference. Has a crime possibly been committed? Is this outside of their character? Certainly someone that has a behavioral health issue or mental illness, there's going to be some concern with that, especially if they, were they being treated for, suicidal ideations and depression and things of that nature. But you basically just have to take a deep dive into that person's life, basically, and pick it apart. Who do they associate with? Who was the last person to see them? What were the circumstances surrounding that situation? And basically try to follow the breadcrumbs. But if you have information to believe a crime may have been committed, certainly that's going to up the ante and create an additional path that we're going to go down.
I also want to ask you about a case that is, I would say, one of the most infamous, one of the most notable murders in recent Atlanta history in Midtown, and that's the killing of Katie Janess, who was walking her dog, Bowie, 40 years old. She and her dog, Bowie, both found stabbed to death in the early morning of July 28th of 2021. As you see, autopsy reveals how many times she was stabbed. It's really, when you look at the details of this case, it's really alarming. But the thing is, now it's been well over a year. In July, it will have been 2 years. Police have still not named a person of interest in this very high-profile murder. Why not? What's going on?
I believe that this case is solvable. I believe the case will be solved. Atlanta Police Department, I can certainly speak and say they have very capable investigators working this case nonstop. They have not forgotten about this victim nor the families. This case certainly gripped our city with fear based on the violent nature of the killing and some of the mutilation and things that were discovered at the time of this crime. There's still that concern from the LGBTQ community. You have the animal lovers out there. Everybody was just, I think, equally saddened and shocked by the level of violence that happened. But as in any case we work where a violent crime has been committed, we're waiting for that break. We're waiting for that, that one little piece of that puzzle where somebody either saw something, they heard something, and maybe they just have not come forward.
Yeah, and callers can remain anonymous. If anyone has any information, it's not too late. It's never too late to share. There is a reward for up to $10,000 for any information leading to an arrest, leading to helping solve this case. And interesting to note, important to note, new security cameras have been installed around Piedmont Park. About $4 million has been secured to do that, according to city officials with the Atlanta Parks and Rec Department. 30 new surveillance cameras ever since this murder happened. What else do people need to think about? Because it's certainly changed the way people feel walking around Piedmont Park late at night, especially. People in Midtown really still looking for answers. What should people keep in mind?
But that's one of the frustrations for law enforcement, is that we can't assure the public that the person responsible for this crime isn't still walking around. I can tell you any number of cases that we've been involved in that it wasn't solved for many years because the person had been incarcerated. They were arrested and picked up maybe for some separate unrelated crime, and they were not able to offend, but we didn't know that. Or they could be walking around amongst us. So that's the part that's really tough for us, is we can't, assure the public that they're safe, but they are doing things, as you mentioned, the security cameras, the additional heightened security that they've put in place around the park to ensure the safety of the citizens who live, work, and play in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Retired Special Agent Trebor Randle, formerly of the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, we really appreciate you giving us this unique analysis and perspective, which I know you probably wouldn't be able to do if you were still with GBI. So we're actually so grateful to have this opportunity to hear from you.
Thank you for having me, Joy.
Thank you. And of course, we're going to keep following the latest on the investigation into the Piedmont Park murder and those two missing women cases right here on Atlanta News First Plus. Have a great day.